They didn't notice me at first. I stood in the doorway of the boardroom, my boardroom, and watched four people I had trusted with everything plot how to take it all away. The CEO I'd promoted leaned back in his chair, smiling. Once the old man's signs were clear, he won't even understand half of what's in the documents. The CFO laughed. He thinks we're looking out for him. That's the beauty of it. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, listening to men I'd mentored, people I'd believed in, discuss me like I was a confused child who needed to be managed out of his own company. They had no idea I'd heard every word, and they had no idea what was about to happen. Let me back up. 3 months earlier, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 72 years old, and after building my company from a one-room operation into a firm worth more than I'd ever imagined, I'd finally stepped back. Not out, just back. I still owned the majority. I still came by the office. But I'd handed the day-to-day to people I thought I could trust. I thought stepping aside was the responsible thing to do. Let the younger generation run with it. Enjoy my mornings. Take my wife to dinner without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I'd earned that, hadn't I? That's what they told me anyway. You've built something incredible. Now let us protect it for you. You deserve rest. We'll handle the complexity. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. Because the alternative, that the people I'd lifted up, the people I'd trusted with my legacy, were waiting for me to turn my back so they could gut everything I'd built, that was too ugly to imagine. But that morning, standing outside the boardroom at 6:30 a.m., listening to them laugh about how easy it was going to be, I learned something I should have known a long time. Dagobot, silence isn't weakness, and stepping back doesn't mean you've lost your power. It just means you're watching, and I had been watching more carefully than they ever realized. Started the company in 1981. Back then, it was just me, a phone line, and a card table in the corner of a rented warehouse. I brokered industrial parts, nothing glamorous. Gaskets, fittings, custom fabrications for manufacturers who needed things done right and done fast. I didn't have an MBA. I had a work ethic and a reputation for keeping my word. It took 15 years before I could afford to hire my 10th employee, 20 before we moved into a real office building, 30 before I stopped wondering if one bad quarter would wipe us out. By the time I turned 70, we had 140 employees, clients in 11 states, and contracts with some of the largest manufacturers in the country. We weren't Fortune 500, but we were solid, respected, profitable, and I was tired. Not beaten, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time. My wife, Carol, had been patient. She'd eaten 1,000 cold dinners, spent 1,000 nights alone while I worked late, and never once complained. But I could see it in her eyes. She wanted me home. She wanted us to have time while we still had health. So 2 years ago, I made the decision. I promoted Richard Voss to CEO. Richard had been with me for 12 years. He came in as a sales manager, sharp and hungry, and worked his way up to VP of operations. He knew the business. He knew the clients, and he seemed to care about the company the way I did, like it was more than just a paycheck. I kept my majority ownership. I kept my office. I kept a seat on the board, but I handed him the reins. Take care of it, I told him the day we made it official. This is my life's work. Treat it like yours. He shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, I won't let you down. I believed him. For the first year, everything seemed fine. I'd come into the office 2, maybe 3 times a week. Walk the floors. Check in with the department heads. Richard would update me on the big decisions, and I'd nod and let him run with it. He was capable, confident. I was proud of him. I started to relax. Carol and I took a trip to Maine that summer, our first real vacation in a decade. We spent 2 weeks in a cabin by the water. No emails, no phone calls. Just us and the quiet and the sound of the lake at dawn. It felt like freedom. When I got back, Richard told me everything had run smoothly. You didn't miss a thing, he said, smiling. We've got this. I started coming in less. Once a week. Then every other week, I'd spend my mornings walking the neighborhood with Carol. I'd meet old friends for lunch. I even started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. People at the office started calling me the founder instead of boss. It was affectionate, I thought. Respectful. I didn't realize it was also dismissive. I didn't notice the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. I didn't notice how Richard's updates became vaguer. Everything's on track. Numbers are strong. Don't worry about the details. I didn't notice that I was being managed, not led, not consulted, managed, like a shareholder who needed to be kept happy but out of the way. It wasn't until late last fall that I started to feel it, that subtle shift. I'd come by the office on a Thursday morning, unannounced, just to say hello. I walked past the conference room and saw Richard in there with our CFO, Angela Pruitt, and two of the senior VPs, Mark Schaffer and David Lind. The door was closed. That wasn't unusual. But when I knocked and opened it, the room went still. Not quiet, still. Like I'd interrupted something. "Hey," I said. "Just wanted to see if anyone wanted to grab lunch." Richard stood up too quickly. "Oh, hey, Bill, we're just running through some quarterly projections." "Boring stuff." Angela smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll catch you next time." I nodded. Said something about not wanting to interrupt. Closed the door and stood there in the hallway, feeling like a stranger in my own building. That night I mentioned it to Carol. "Maybe they're planning a surprise for you," she said. "Your birthday's coming up." I laughed it off. Told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few weeks I started paying closer attention. Little things. Richard's assistant used to greet me warmly. Now she barely looked up. The weekly reports I used to get automatically stopped coming unless I asked. And when I did ask, they arrived late, with key sections summarized instead of detailed. I told myself it was just growing pains, the company evolving, me learning to let go. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to look, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. Not yet. It happened on a Tuesday in early December. I'd driven in that morning without calling ahead. Something I used to do all the time but had stopped doing lately. I'm not sure why I went that day. Maybe instinct. Maybe just stubbornness. But I wanted to feel like I still belonged there. I parked in my old spot, the one with my name still on the sign, and walked through the front entrance. A few people smiled and waved. Others looked surprised, like they'd forgotten I still existed. I made my way upstairs to the executive floor. My office was at the end of the hall, door still marked with my name, William Thornton, founder. I noticed they'd added the word founder sometime in the last 6 months. It used to just say my name. I was halfway to my door when Richard stepped out of his office. "Bill." He said it too loud, too bright. "Didn't know you were coming in today." "Thought I'd stop by," I said. "See how things are running." "Great timing, actually." He glanced back toward his office. "Angela and I were just talking. You got a few minutes?" Something in his tone made me hesitate, but I nodded. "Sure." He led me into the conference room, the small one, not the boardroom. Angela was already there, sitting with her laptop open and a leather portfolio in front of her. She stood when I entered, shook my hand with that same tight smile I'd seen before. "Bill, good to see you," she said. We sat down. Richard folded his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. His expression carefully composed, what I'd come to recognize as his serious but compassionate face. "So," he began, "Angela and I have been talking and we wanted to run something by you. Just as people who care about you." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my face neutral. "I'm listening." Angela slid a folder across the table. "Bill, you've built something incredible here. You know that. We all know that. And frankly, the company's in the best position it's ever been. Revenue's up 18% year over year. We just locked in 2 major contracts that are going to carry us for the next 5 years. That's good to hear," I said. "It is," Richard said. "But here's the thing. With that growth comes complexity. Legal complexity, financial complexity. We want to make sure you're protected." "Protected," I repeated. "Protected," Angela echoed. She opened the folder. Inside were several documents, tabs sticking out along the edges. "We've been working with the firm, Caldwell and Roth, you know them, and they've advised us that given where you are in life, it makes sense to formalize a few things." I stared at her. "Where I am in life." "You've earned your rest, Bill," Richard said, his voice softening in that way that made my skin crawl. You shouldn't have to worry about operational decisions, liability, any of that. That's our job now. But the way things are currently structured, you're still technically on the hook for a lot of executive-level exposure. Something went wrong, God forbid, you'd be personally vulnerable. What are you suggesting? I asked. Angela tapped the top document. We're suggesting a clean transition of operational authority. You'd retain your ownership, of course. That's untouchable. But day-to-day decision-making, signing authority, fiduciary responsibility, all of that transfers formally to Richard as CEO, with board oversight. Essentially, Richard added, you'd move into an emeritus role, honored, respected, still very much part of the family, but free from the weight of it all. I looked down at the papers but didn't touch them. This also helps with estate planning, Angela continued. If something were to happen to you, and again, we're not saying it will, but if it did, Carol would be protected. The transition would be seamless. No legal battles. No confusion. Everything clean, she said it so smoothly, so reasonably, like she was doing me a favor. I sat back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. Richard shifted. We're not asking you to decide right now. We just wanted to bring it to your attention. Get your thoughts. My thoughts, I said quietly, are that I didn't build this company so I could be protected from it. Angela's smile thinned. Of course not. But Bill, you're 72. You've been doing this for over 40 years. Don't you think you've earned the right to step back and just enjoy your life? There it was. That word again. Earned. Like stepping back was a reward they were offering me, like I needed their permission. I appreciate the concern, I said, keeping my voice even. But I'm not signing anything today. I'll need to review this with my own attorney. Richard's face flickered, just for a second. Disappointment, maybe, or irritation. Absolutely, he said, recovering quickly. Of course. Take all the time you need. We just wanted to make sure you had the information. Angela closed the folder and slid it toward me. Keep that copy. Bill, seriously, we're only thinking about what's best for you. I picked up the folder, stood, and tucked it under my arm. I know you are, I said. I didn't believe it, but I wanted to see what they'd do if they thought I did. I left the conference room, walked down the hall to my office, and closed the door behind me. I sat at my desk, the same desk I'd had since 1987, and stared at the folder. They hadn't asked me a single question about what I wanted. They'd just told me what was best, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Suspicion. I didn't open the folder that day. I took it home, set it on my desk in the study, and told myself I'd look at it in the morning. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way Richard had looked at me, the way Angela's smile never reached her eyes, the way they'd used the word protected like a blanket they were trying to smother me with. The next morning I called my attorney. His name was Martin Kessler. We'd worked together for 20 years. Contract disputes, acquisitions, partnership agreements. He was careful, thorough, and he didn't sugarcoat things. Martin, I said when he picked up, I need you to look at something. What's going on, Bill? I'm not sure yet, I said. But I don't like the smell of it. I scanned the documents and sent them over. He called me back 3 hours later. Bill, he said slowly, do not sign any of this. My stomach dropped. That bad? It's not illegal, he said, but it's aggressive. If you sign this, you're essentially handing over every meaningful control mechanism you have. Operational authority, signing power, access to financial systems, voting proxies on key decisions. It all transfers to Richard and the board. And the board composition? They're proposing to add 2 new seats, both appointed by the CEO. Which means Richard picks them, I said. Correct. You'd still own the majority of shares, but you'd have almost no functional power. They could run the company however they wanted, and you'd just be watching. I closed my eyes. Why would they do this? I don't know, Martin said. But I don't like it. My advice, don't sign. And if they push, ask questions. Lots of them. I thanked him and hung up. For 2 days, I didn't hear from Richard. Then, on Thursday afternoon, he called. Hey, Bill. Just checking in. Did you get a chance to review those documents? I did, I said. I'm still going over them with my attorney. A pause. Your attorney? Martin Kessler. You've met him. Right, of course, another pause. Bill, I hope you don't think we're trying to pull something here. This is standard stuff. Caldwell and Roth recommended it. It's really just about protecting you. That word again, I understand, I said. But I'm not in a hurry. I want to make sure I understand what I'm signing. Absolutely. Take your time. His voice was smooth, but I could hear the tension underneath. It's just, well, we've got some time-sensitive opportunities coming up, and it would be easier if we had clear authority to move quickly. You know how it is. What opportunities? I asked. I'll loop you in soon, he said. Still finalizing details, but trust me, it's good news. He didn't loop me in. The following Monday, Angela called and asked if I could come by the office. Just for a quick signature on some routine filings, she said. Won't take 5 minutes. I drove in. When I got there, Richard was waiting in the conference room, along with David Lind, one of the VPs, and a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, expensive suit, leather briefcase. Bill, thanks for coming in, Richard said, standing. This is Jonathan Pruitt from Caldwell and Roth. He's here to walk you through the documents and answer any questions. I shook the man's hand. His grip was firm, confident, the kind of handshake that said, I've done this 100 times, and you're going to sign. We sat. Jonathan opened his briefcase and pulled out a revised set of documents, thicker than the first batch. Mr. Thornton, he began, I understand you have some concerns. Let me clarify a few things. What we're proposing here is really a best practice governance structure for a company of your size and stage. You've done the hard work. Now it's about sustainability and succession. This protects your legacy. I've heard that word a lot lately, I said. Protected, he smiled. Because it's true. You've built something valuable. We want to make sure it lasts. And what if I don't sign? I asked. The room went quiet. Richard leaned forward. Bill, why wouldn't you? I'm not saying I won't, I said carefully. I'm asking what happens if I don't. Jonathan glanced at Richard, then back at me. Well, nothing happens per se, but the company would remain in a less optimal governance structure. It could create complications down the line, especially if you're not actively involved. There it was, the subtle threat. If you're not going to be here, let us run it. I looked at Richard. Are you telling me I need to sign this to stay involved in my own company? No, he said quickly. Of course not. But Bill, you've been stepping back. That's your choice and we respect it. We're just trying to formalize what's already happening. Except I never said I was stepping away permanently. I said I was stepping back, Angela spoke up. And we're grateful for that. But the reality is the company is evolving. We need clear leadership. Clients need to know who's in charge. So do employees. I held her gaze. They do know. I am, her smile faltered. I stood up. I'll review this with Martin. When I'm ready, I'll let you know. Jonathan started to speak. But Richard cut him off. Sure, Bill, whatever you need. I walked out, but as I reached the door, I heard Richard's voice behind me. Low and tight. We can't wait forever. I didn't turn around. But I heard him. I couldn't stop thinking about what Richard had said. We can't wait forever. It played in my head on a loop. At dinner, in bed, during my morning walks with Carol. She asked me twice if I was feeling all right. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. By the end of the week, I'd made a decision. I was going to go in early, unannounced. Before Richard, before Angela, before any of them had a chance to prepare their smiles and their scripts. I wanted to see the company the way it actually ran now, not the version they performed for me. I told Carol I had an early meeting. She kissed me on the cheek and told me to drive carefully. I left the house at 5:30 in the morning. The office building was dark when I pulled into the parking lot. Only a few cars were there, maintenance maybe, or someone finishing a night shift in the warehouse. I parked near the side entrance and used my key card. It still worked. I wasn't sure if it would. The hallways were silent. The lights were on timers, flickering to life as I walked past. I took the stairs to the second floor, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. When I reached the executive floor, I saw a light on in the boardroom. I stopped. It was 6:15 in the morning. No one should have been here yet. I moved quietly down the hallway. The boardroom door was closed, but not latched, just resting against the frame. Through the narrow gap, I could see movement. Hear voices. I stepped closer, and I listened. Just need him to sign, Angela was saying. Once that's done, we're clear. He's dragging his feet. That was Richard. He took the documents to Kessler. Of course he did, a third voice said. Mark Schaffer, VP of Sales. He's not an idiot. No, Richard said. But he's old. And he's sentimental. He doesn't want to believe we'd do anything that wasn't in his best interest. Someone laughed. It might have been David Lind. That's the beauty of it, David said. He wants to trust us. Makes it easy. My chest tightened. What if he doesn't sign? Angela asked. There was a pause. He will, Richard said. We just need to apply the right pressure. Make him feel like he's the problem, like he's holding the company back by not letting go. And if that doesn't work, Mark asked. Then we move to Plan B, Richard said. We've already got interest from Garrison Holdings. They've been circling for months. If we can position this as a sale with leadership continuity, they'll pay top dollar. Bill gets his payout, we get ours, and everyone walks away happy. Except he has no idea what the company's actually worth now, Angela said. No, Richard agreed. He doesn't, another laugh. Quieter this time, but sharp. Those contracts he negotiated 3 years ago, Angela continued. The ones he put in place right before he stepped back? They're maturing next quarter. Revenue's going to spike 40%, maybe more. Garrison knows that. We know that. Bill has no idea, Jesus, Mark muttered. He set us up for this, and he doesn't even realize it. That's what happens when you check out, Richard said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. He wanted to go play retirement, fine, but you don't get to disappear and keep control. Doesn't work that way. So what's the timeline? David asked. Ideally, we close with Garrison by end of Q1, Richard said. But that only works if Bill's out of the way. If he's still on the board with majority control, he can block the sale. Which is why he needs to sign, Angela said. Which is why he will sign, Richard corrected. We just need to make him think it's his idea. Or at least that it's inevitable. Silence, then Mark spoke, quieter now. You really think he won't fight this? He's 72 years old, Richard said. He's tired. He wants to believe we're taking care of things. And when we tell him the sale is in everyone's best interest, including his, he'll convince himself we're right. And if he doesn't? Mark pressed. Richard's voice went cold. Then we do it without him. Caldwell and Roth says if we can demonstrate incapacity or abandonment of fiduciary duty, we can petition for a forced buyout. It'll get messy, but it's doable. My hands were shaking. I stepped back from the door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. I turned and walked, quickly, quietly back toward the stairwell. I didn't run. I didn't let myself, but every step felt like it took forever. I made it to my car, got in, and closed the door, and then I just sat there, in the cold, in the dark, trying to breathe. They weren't just pushing me out, they were erasing me. These people I had hired, trained, trusted, believed in, had spent the last 2 years setting me up. And I'd let them. I'd stepped back because I thought I was doing the right thing. Because I thought I'd built something strong enough to survive without me. I thought I was leaving it in good hands. I was wrong. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe longer. Then I pulled out my phone and I called Martin. Martin answered on the second ring. Bill? 6:30 in the morning. I know, I said. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. I need you to tell me everything. No sugarcoating. What are they trying to do? I heard him sit up. Where are you? In my car. Outside the office. I just heard them, Martin. All of them. Richard, Angela, Mark, David. They're planning to sell the company out from under me. Silence then. Tell me exactly what you heard. I did. Every word I could remember. The timeline. Garrison Holdings. The contracts they said I didn't know about. The plan to pressure me into signing or force me out if I didn't. When I finished, Martin let out a long breath. Bill, listen to me very carefully. Do not go back in there. Do not confront them. Not yet. Why not? My hands were still shaking. It's my company, because if you go in angry, you'll make a mistake. And they're betting on that. He paused. Let me make some calls. I need to confirm a few things. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? I'll be there. I drove across town in a fog. The streets were still empty, the sky just beginning to lighten. I kept replaying their voices in my head. He's old. He's sentimental. He wants to trust us. By the time I reached Martin's office, he was already there, along with someone I hadn't expected to see, Frank Calloway. Frank had been on my original board of directors. Back in the early 2000s. He'd retired 5 years ago and moved to North Carolina, but we still talked every few months. He was older than me, late 70s, but sharp as ever. Frank, I said, shaking his hand. What are you doing here? Martin called me, Frank said. Told me what's going on. Bill, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. Said what? He gestured to the conference table. We sat. Martin opened his laptop. I spent the last hour digging into your company's financials. The parts that are publicly accessible. Anyway. Bill, do you remember those supply agreements you negotiated with Locke Industries and Brennan Manufacturing back in 2021? Of course, I said. Long-term contracts. Fixed pricing on our end, volume guarantees on theirs. Right, Martin said. Well, those contracts included performance escalators. If their production hit certain benchmarks, your supply fees would increase automatically. I remember. They hit those benchmarks, Martin said. Both of them. Last quarter. I stared at him. Bill, your revenue is about to jump 43%. Maybe more. And that's locked in for the next 4 years minimum. I felt the air leave my lungs. Garrison Holdings knows this, Martin continued. They've been watching your company for a while. And my guess? Richard's been feeding them information. He's probably negotiating his own golden parachute as part of the deal. Frank leaned forward. Bill, I tried to warn you about Richard last year. Remember? I told you to watch him. I did remember. Frank had called me after a charity event where he'd run into Richard. Said something felt off. I'd brushed it off. I thought you were being paranoid, I admitted. So did I, Frank said. I hoped I was wrong. Martin pulled up another document. Here's the good news. You didn't sign anything, which means you still have full majority control. You're still the primary shareholder. You still have final authority over any sale, merger, or structural change. They can't sell without me, I said slowly. They can't, Martin confirmed. Not legally. Everything they're doing hinges on you either signing over your authority or stepping aside voluntarily. Or proving I'm incapacitated, I said, remembering what Richard had said. They'd have a hell of a time doing that, Martin said. You're sharp, you're healthy, and you've been involved enough that no court would buy it. It would be a fight and they'd lose. I sat back in my chair. For the first time since I'd heard them talking, I felt something other than shock. I felt clarity. So what do? I asked. Martin looked at Frank. Frank looked at me. You let them keep talking, Frank said. Let them think you're considering signing. Let them think they've won. And then? I asked. Then, Martin said, you show up when they least expect it. Do you remind them who actually owns the company? I nodded slowly. They're planning to call a board meeting, I said. Richard mentioned it. Probably to formalize everything before they approach me with the final paperwork. Do you still have the right to attend board meetings? Martin asked. I'm still on the board, I said. I never resigned, Martin smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then I suggest you exercise that right. I stood up. For the first time in days, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to rage. I was just going to walk into that boardroom and take back what was mine. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. I knew because Richard's assistant had sent out the calendar invitation to the full board 3 days earlier. I was copied, probably by accident. Or maybe they assumed I wouldn't show up. I'd stopped showing up to a lot of things. That was going to change. Martin and I prepared carefully. He compiled everything. Financial records showing the contract escalations. Email trails he'd subpoenaed through a friendly contact at our auditing firm. And a timeline of every misleading statement Richard and Angela had made to me over the last 6 months. You don't need to get angry, Martin reminded me the night before. You just need to be clear. Let the facts do the work. I'm not angry, I said. That was a lie. I was furious, but I wasn't going to show it. Thursday morning, I put on my navy blazer, the one I used to wear to client meetings when a handshake meant something. I knotted my tie carefully. Carol watched me from the bedroom doorway. "You look like you're going to war," she said quietly. "I'm going to a board meeting." She crossed the room and adjusted my collar. Her hands were steady. "Then go remind them who you are." I arrived at 8:55. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator, walked down the hall, and stood outside the door for a moment. Listening, I could hear Richard's voice, confident, relaxed. "Final signatures by end of next week. And we'll be in position to close with Garrison by mid-February. Bill's attorney is still reviewing, but I think he's coming around. He's tired. He wants this to be easy." I opened the door. The room went silent. Richard was standing at the head of the table, mid-gesture. Angela was to his right, laptop open. Mark and David sat across from each other, coffee cups in hand. 2 other board members I recognized, Janet Hale from HR and Tom Orson, our outside financial advisor, looked up in surprise. "Bill," Richard said. His smile appeared instantly, but his eyes didn't match. "We didn't think you'd make it." "I'm still on the board," I said. "I'm entitled to attend." I walked to the far end of the table and sat down. I set my leather folder in front of me but didn't open it yet. Richard recovered quickly. "Of course. We're glad you're here. We were just going over some strategic planning items. Nothing that can't wait. Don't stop on my account," I said. He hesitated, glanced at Angela. "Well," he said slowly, "we were discussing a potential partnership opportunity. Very preliminary, but it could position the company for significant growth." "Garrison Holdings," I said. The room froze. Angela's fingers stopped on her keyboard. Mark set his coffee down carefully. Richard's smile faltered. "You've heard of them?" "I've heard a lot of things," I said. I opened the folder. "I've heard that revenue is about to jump 43% due to contracts I negotiated 3 years ago. I've heard that you've been in talks with Garrison for months. I've heard that you plan to sell the company without telling me what it's actually worth." No one spoke. "I've also heard," I continued, my voice calm and even, "that you think I'm too old and too sentimental to notice." Richard's face went pale. "Bill," he started. I held up a hand. 6 days ago," I said. "I came to this office at 6 in the morning. I stood outside this room and listened to the 4 of you discuss how to manipulate me into signing away my authority. I heard you laugh about it." Angela closed her laptop. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the table. "David wouldn't meet my eyes. You said I didn't know what the company was worth," I continued. "You were right. I didn't, but I do now." I slid a document across the table toward Richard. "My attorney pulled the financials. The real ones, not the summaries you've been sending me." Richard didn't touch the paper. "You've been positioning this sale as a win for everyone," I said. "But the truth is you were going to push me out, cash in on the contracts I negotiated, and walk away with money that isn't yours." "That's not," Angela started. "Don't," I said quietly. "I heard you, all of you." The silence was suffocating. Tom, the outside advisor, cleared his throat. "Bill, if there's been a misunderstanding—" "There's no misunderstanding," I said. I looked directly at Richard. "You bet that I wouldn't notice. That I'd be too tired, too trusting, too far removed to see what you were doing." "You were wrong," Richard's jaw tightened. "Bill, you stepped back. You wanted to step back? We've been running this company while I what?" I asked. "While I trusted you?" He didn't answer. I stood. "Effective immediately," I said. "Richard Voss, Angela Pruitt, Mark Schaffer, and David Lind are terminated. You'll be escorted out by security within the hour. Your access to all systems, files, and accounts is revoked as of this moment." Angela's face went white. "You can't—" "I can," I said. "I'm the majority shareholder. I'm the founder. And I never signed away a single piece of my authority." I looked at Janet and Tom. "You two stay. We have work to do." Then I turned back to Richard. He was standing now, hands on the table, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. "You thought I was retired," I said quietly. "I wasn't retired. I was just listening." I picked up my folder, "Security will be here in 5 minutes." And I walked out. Security arrived in 3 minutes. I'd called them from the hallway after leaving the boardroom. 2 guards I'd known for years, Mike Torino and James Park. Good men, steady. They looked confused when I explained what I needed. But they didn't ask questions. "Just make sure they don't take anything that isn't personal," I told them, "and stay with them until they're off the property." By the time I returned to the executive floor, word had already started spreading. I could see it in the faces of the administrative staff, the sideways glances, the hushed conversations, the careful way people moved through the hallways. Change was coming. They could feel it. I walked past the boardroom. Through the glass wall, I could see Richard packing his briefcase. His hands were shaking. Angela sat stiffly in her chair, staring at her phone like it might provide an escape. Mark and David stood by the window talking in low, urgent voices. None of them looked at me. I went to my office, the one that still had my name on the door, and sat behind my desk. For the first time in 2 years, it felt like mine again. 20 minutes later, there was a knock. Janet Hale appeared in the doorway. "Bill, can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap. "I need you to know," she said, "I didn't know. About Garrison, about the sale. They never included me in those discussions." I studied her face. Janet had been with the company for 8 years. She was careful, honest, and had never once tried to play politics. "I believe you," I said. She nodded, relief flickering across her features. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me figure out who else knew," I said. "And who we can trust." Over the next hour, we compiled a list. It was shorter than I'd hoped, but not as short as I'd feared. Most of the department heads had been kept in the dark. The warehouse managers, the field supervisors, the senior engineers, they'd all been doing their jobs, unaware that their leadership was planning to sell the company from under them. But a few people had known, and a few people had stayed quiet. I promoted 3 of them that afternoon. Sarah Martinez, who'd been the assistant operations manager, became the new VP of operations. She'd been with us for 6 years, worked her way up from the warehouse floor, and had never once played games. Jim Kellerman, our senior project manager, became VP of client relations. He knew our biggest accounts personally, and had been the one maintaining those relationships while Richard schemed. Elena Vasquez, our chief financial analyst, became interim CFO. She'd been Angela's deputy, but I knew from Janet that Elena had been uncomfortable with some of the strategic planning sessions she'd been excluded from. Smart enough to know something was wrong, loyal enough to stay quiet until she understood what. I met with each of them separately. "I'm not asking you to clean up this mess overnight," I told them. "I'm asking you to help me rebuild the trust that was broken. Can you do that?" Each of them said yes. By 4 o'clock, the building felt different, calmer, more focused. I called Garrison Holdings. The CEO, Marcus Webb, took the call personally. "Mr. Thornton," he said, "I was hoping to hear from you. Richard mentioned that you might be interested in exploring a partnership." "Richard doesn't work here anymore," I said. Silence. "I see," Webb said carefully. "Well, perhaps we could discuss—" "No," I said. "We couldn't. Mr. Thornton, I think there might be a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "You tried to buy my company through the back door. That's not how I do business." I hung up. That evening, I stayed late to review everything Martin and Elena had compiled. The real financial picture was even better than I'd thought. The contract escalations were just the beginning. We had 3 more major agreements that could trigger similar bonuses over the next 18 months. Richard had been right about one thing. The company was in the best position it had ever been. He'd just been wrong about who was going to benefit from it. At 7 o'clock, I locked my office and walked through the building. Most people had gone home, but a few were still working. They looked up when I passed, not with the careful politeness I'd grown used to, but with something that looked like respect, like they remembered who I was. I drove home in the dark, thinking about trust and betrayal and the strange comfort of work that matters. Carol was waiting in the kitchen. "How did it go?" she asked. "They're gone," I said. She kissed me on the cheek. "Good, are you hungry?" I was, for the first time in weeks. I was. It's been 6 months since that Thursday morning in the boardroom. 6 months since I walked back into my own company and reminded 4 people that respect isn't something you take. It's something you earn. And keep earning every single day. The transition wasn't seamless. Nothing ever is when you have to rebuild trust from the ground up. For the first few weeks, I could feel the uncertainty in the hallways. People weren't sure what my return meant. Was I going to micromanage everything? Was I going to undo 2 years of decisions out of spite? Was this the beginning of a bitter old man's revenge tour? I understood their concern. I'd seen it happen before. Founders who returned to their companies angry, determined to prove that no one could run things the way they could, burning bridges and destroying morale in the name of vindication. That wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was simpler and harder. I wanted to rebuild something that had been broken. Not just the company's leadership structure, but the culture of honesty that I'd thought we'd had all along. Sarah, Jim, and Elena stepped into their new roles carefully, quietly. They didn't make grand pronouncements or sweeping changes. They just did the work. They talked to people. They listened. They made it clear that the games were over, that performance mattered more than politics, and that information flowed up and down, not just sideways between conspirators. Slowly, the building began to feel like itself again. We never did hear from Garrison Holdings after I hung up on Marcus Webb. I'm sure they found another company to acquire, another leadership team willing to sell out their founder for the right price. But it wasn't going to be us. The financial projections Martin had shown me proved conservative. By the end of the quarter, our revenue had increased by 51%. The contracts I'd negotiated 3 years ago, the ones Richard thought I'd forgotten about, triggered performance. Bonuses that made us one of the most profitable mid-sized manufacturers in the EU region. Richard had been right about one thing. I had set us up for success. He'd just been wrong about who deserved to benefit from it. I never saw him again after that Thursday morning. I heard through industry contacts that he'd landed at a competitor, a smaller firm where he'd have to prove himself all over again. Angela took a position with a consulting firm in another state. Mark and David both struggled to find comparable roles. Word gets around in a business like ours. People talk. I didn't feel satisfaction in their struggles. I felt something closer to disappointment. These weren't evil people. They weren't cartoon villains twirling mustaches and plotting world domination. They were ambitious professionals who had convinced themselves that their betrayal was justified, that I was an obstacle to progress, that my stepping back meant I had stepped away permanently. They had mistaken my trust for weakness, and they had mistaken my silence for absence. I think about that often now. For 2 years, I had believed that good leadership meant getting out of the way. I thought I was being generous, giving the next generation room to grow, space to make their own decisions. I thought stepping back was a gift to them, to Carol, to myself. And maybe it was. But I learned something that I should have known already. There's a difference between stepping back and checking out. I had checked out. Not entirely. Not completely, but enough. Enough that Richard felt comfortable lying to my face. Enough that Angela thought she could manipulate me with legal documents I wouldn't understand. Enough that Mark and David could sit in meetings and laugh about how easy it was to manage me. I had handed them my trust like a blank check and assumed they would honor it. That was my mistake. Not because trust is wrong. Trust is essential. You can't build anything meaningful without it. But trust without verification becomes naivety. And naivety in the wrong hands becomes a weapon that people will use against you. I'll never step back that far again. These days, I'm in the office 3 days a week. Not micromanaging, not second-guessing every decision, but present, visible, asking questions, staying informed. I've learned to be involved without being invasive, to trust while still verifying. Carol was worried at first that this meant I'd never truly retire, that I'd work until I died at my desk like some driven executive from a cautionary tale. But that's not what this is. This isn't about being unable to let go. This is about understanding that some things are too important to abandon, even when you think you've earned the right to walk away. I built this company with 40 years of 18-hour days. Missed dinners and weekend phone calls. I built it with handshake deals and my word as collateral. I built it to last beyond me, to be something my children could be proud of, something that would matter in the world. I'm not going to let anyone strip that legacy for parts. But I've also learned that staying engaged doesn't have to mean staying trapped. Carol and I still take our morning walks. We still travel. We spent 2 weeks in Ireland last month, and next spring we're planning a trip to New Zealand. I still read, still have time for friends. The difference is that now, when I come home, I know what's happening at the company I spent my life building. I know who's making decisions and why. I know when something doesn't feel right, and when something doesn't feel right, I pay attention. The people who work for me now understand this. Sarah, Jim, Elena. They don't see my involvement as interference. They see it as partnership. They know I trust them to do their jobs, and they know I'm paying enough attention to notice when they do them well. It's a different kind of relationship than what I had with Richard and his group. More honest, less comfortable maybe, but more sustainable. Trust, I've learned, isn't something you give once and then forget about. It's something you build every day, with every conversation, every decision, every choice to be transparent instead of secretive, collaborative instead of manipulative. The people who betrayed me thought they understood how trust worked. They thought it was a limitation, something that constrained them, something they had to work around or overcome. They thought my willingness to step back was a sign of weakness, proof that I had lost the hunger that built the company in the first place. They were wrong. Trust isn't weakness, it's efficiency. When it works, it lets you focus on building instead of monitoring, creating instead of controlling. But when it's violated, when it's weaponized against you by people who mistake your generosity for gullibility, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a lesson, and I learned mine. I learned that you can step back without stepping away. You can trust without being naive. You can be generous without being foolish. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet, stay patient, and listen. Because people will always tell you who they really are if you give them enough time and enough rope. You just have to be paying attention when they do. They thought I was retired. They thought retirement meant irrelevance. They forgot that the person who built something from nothing doesn't lose the ability to protect it just because he stepped into the background. I wasn't retired, I was listening.